I slammed the brakes of her white Range Rover inches from the edge of Dead Man's Curve, watching the color drain from her face as the front tire slipped on the gravel precipice. She was screaming, begging me to turn the car around, terrified that the senile old man she married had finally lost his mind. But my hands on the wheel were rock steady. She thought she had rigged my Jaguar to kill me. She didn't know I had the mechanic's confession sitting on the dashboard, and that the flashing lights in the rearview mirror weren't for me. They were for her. This is the story of how I engineered my wife's bankruptcy. Hit subscribe. The inspection begins now.
The air was not cold precisely, but it carried a damp, pervasive chill that settled into the marrow, the kind of weather that reminds a man of his own expiration date. I stood on the travertine pavers of the circular driveway, the stone wet and slick from the morning drizzle. It was a gray day, the sky a flat sheet of slate that promised nothing and threatened everything. I leaned heavily on my cane. It is a beautiful thing, carved from a single piece of hickory with a sterling silver handle shaped like the head of a wolf. It is also a lie. My hip aches when the barometric pressure drops, a dull throb that I have learned to ignore, just as I ignore the ringing in my ears or the hollowness in my chest. But the limp, the slight tremble in my hand, that is theater. I discovered 3 years ago that if one presents the facade of a crumbling ruin, people cease to guard their tongues around you. They treat you like furniture, ornate, expensive, and deaf. It is a useful tactical advantage. Elena stood beside me, her hand wrapped around my bicep. To an observer, it would look like a gesture of loving support, a devoted young wife steadying her frail husband. But I know the difference between a caress and a clamp. Her fingers were digging into the wool of my cardigan, her grip possessive, bordering on desperate. It felt less like affection and more like a shackle, or perhaps the way a frantic investor clings to a plummeting stock.
She is 34, her skin is taut, her hair a cascade of manufactured blonde, and her eyes are the color of a swimming pool, shallow and chemically blue. I am 72. She calls our marriage a meeting of souls. I call it a lease agreement with a very high overhead. "It's back, Harrison," she cooed, her voice pitching an octave higher than natural. She pointed toward the wrought iron gates at the end of the long drive. "Just look at it. I had them detail the interior, too. You need this drive. Just you and the road. Clear your head." I did not look at the gate immediately. I looked at her. She was vibrating. It was a subtle thing, a microscopic tremor running through her frame, like a suspension bridge under too much load. She wore a perfume I had never liked, something floral and cloying, heavy with jasmine and tuberose. Today she had applied too much of it. It hung in the heavy air, a sweet, suffocating cloud meant to mask the sour, metallic scent of her anxiety. "You are too kind, Elena," I said. My voice was dry, the sound of dead leaves scraping over concrete. I kept my sentences short, playing the part of the fatigue-ridden senior. "To organize all this, without my asking. It's a surprise." She squeezed my arm again, her nails biting through the fabric. "You've been so cooped up in the study, looking at those old blueprints. You need wind, you need speed." I turned my gaze to the gate as the mechanism engaged. The heavy iron swung inward with a low hydraulic groan. "Blueprints." She said the word with a faint sneer she didn't realize she was making. Elena did not understand the sanctity of a blueprint. To her, a house was an asset to be liquidated. To me, it was a testament to order. I had spent 40 years designing skylines. I understood that a structure is only as good as its foundation, and if the concrete is poured with too much sand, the collapse is inevitable. Elena was a structure built entirely on sand. The flatbed truck backed through the opening, its reverse lights beeping a rhythmic warning. Beep, beep, beep. A countdown. Resting on the bed of the truck, secured by heavy chains, was my sanctuary. The 1967 Jaguar E-Type, Series 1.5, British Racing Green. It was not merely a car, it was a sculpture of steel and glass, a masterpiece of aerodynamics that Enzo Ferrari himself had once called the most beautiful car ever made. I had bought it as a shell 20 years ago, shortly after Catherine passed. Restoring it had been my grief work. I had turned every bolt, sanded every panel, rebuilt the carburetor with my own hands. I knew the tolerance of every piston. I knew the specific vibration of the engine at 3,000 RPM. Elena hated it. For 5 years, she had complained about the stench of gasoline that clung to my clothes after I drove it. She called it a money pit. She called it a loud, dangerous relic. She had once suggested we sell it to buy a boot, a plastic floating frat house where she could drink rosé with her vacuous friends. And yet, 3 days ago, she had insisted it needed a service. She had been adamant. The brakes were squeaking, Harrison. I heard them. I sent it to that specialist you like. I had not heard the brakes squeak. My hearing is selectively poor, but mechanically perfect. However, I had allowed it. I wanted to see the architecture of the lie she was constructing.
"Look at it shine," she whispered, the desperation leaking into her tone. "It's perfect." "A drive through the canyon does sound final," I said. I felt her stiffen against me. The word hung in the air between us. A smarter adversary would have caught the double entendre, the implication of an ending. But Elena is not smart. She is merely cunning, a distinction often lost on the predatory class. "Final?" she laughed, a brittle glass-breaking sound. "Don't be morbid, darling. I just meant definitive, a definitive break from the stress." She was watching the truck with a focus that was almost manic. Her eyes darted like a trapped bird seeking an open window. She wasn't looking at the paint job. She wasn't admiring the chrome wire wheels. She was looking at the undercarriage. She was looking for assurance. I took a slow, labored breath, tasting the ozone in the air. "It looks different," I murmured. "Different? How?" She snapped her head toward me, her eyes wide. "It looks exactly the same, just clean, better." "The light," I said, tapping my cane on the stone. "The light reflects differently off the hood. Perhaps it is just my eyes. They are not what they used to be."
She exhaled, a ragged release of tension. "It's just the wax, Harrison. Top of the line. Carnauba. Only the best for you." The truck hissed to a halt 10 yards from us. The air brakes sneezed, a violent release of pressure that made Elena jump. The driver killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, filled only by the distant hum of traffic on the coast highway and the chaotic thumping of my wife's heart against my arm. I studied the vehicle. To the untrained eye, it was pristine. The green paint was deep enough to drown in. The chrome bumpers reflected the gray sky, twisting the clouds into funhouse shapes. But I was not looking at the surface. I was thinking about the machine underneath. A car is a complex system of forces. It relies on the integrity of thousands of individual components working in concert. If you remove one bolt, shear one pin, or sever one line, the system becomes a projectile. Elena had not hired the usual transport service. I noted the logo on the door of the truck, Miller's Towing and Recovery. Not Prestige Auto Transport, who I had used for a decade. A discrepancy. A crack in the facade.
"Why this company?" I asked, keeping my voice mild, staring straight ahead. "What?" Elena blinked, distracted. "The transport. This is not the usual fellow. Where is Giovanni?" "Oh, Giovanni was booked," she said, the lie coming too quickly, too smoothly. She had rehearsed this. "And this company had better reviews for vintage handling. I checked, Harrison, I promise. Stop worrying. You worry about everything." "I suppose I do," I said. "Old men worry because we have run out of time to fix mistakes." The driver's door of the truck groaned open. A pair of heavy, work-worn boots hit the asphalt. This was the moment. The handover. The exchange of the weapon. I shifted my weight on the cane, feeling the solid resistance of the ground. I was not a frail old man in that moment. Inside the crumbling shell of my body, the architect was awake. I was standing in the center of a condemned building, watching the demolition crew arrive, knowing that I held the detonator in my pocket. "Go on," she urged, giving me a little push. "Go get the keys. He probably wants a tip." I looked at her one last time before moving. I memorized the way the pearls sat on her collarbone, the way her makeup had settled into the fine lines around her mouth that she tried so hard to hide.
I memorized the greed that shone in her eyes, a hunger so raw it was almost honest. "Yes," I said, "I suppose he does." I began to walk toward the truck, my cane clicking rhythmically on the wet stone. Click, step, drag, click, step, drag. I was walking toward the truth, and Elena, poor, foolish Elena, thought I was walking toward my grave.
The driver was a tectonic plate of a man. When he stepped down from the cab of the flatbed, the suspension of the truck groaned in relief, shifting upward by visible inches. He did not belong in this neighborhood. The enclave of Blackwood Estates was designed to repel men like him, men composed of rough edges, calloused palms, and the unapologetic grime of labor. He wore a navy blue jumpsuit that had long ago surrendered its color to a patina of oil stains, hydraulic fluid, and road dust. It was unzipped to the sternum, revealing a gray thermal shirt underneath. He did not have the polished, obsequious demeanor of the technicians from the Jaguar dealership, who usually handled my collection. Those men wore white gloves and spoke in hushed tones, treating the cars like holy relics. This man treated the car like what it was, a machine, a collection of bolts, steel, and combustion. He ignored Elena entirely. He didn't even glance at the shimmering blonde woman vibrating with nervous energy 3 feet away. His eyes, dark and set deep beneath a heavy brow, locked onto me. It was a look of evaluation. He was checking the load-bearing capacity of the old man in front of him. "You the owner?" he grunted. "I am," I replied, leaning on my cane, meeting his gaze with the steady indifference of a man who has fired thousands of people. He nodded once, a sharp jerk of the chin, then moved to the rear of the truck. The chains rattled, a harsh industrial sound that echoed off the stucco facade of my home. It sounded like the rattling of dungeon shackles. He worked the levers of the hydraulic lift with practiced ease, the bed of the truck tilting backward, the winch whining in protest as it paid out the cable. My Jaguar E-Type rolled backward, gravity taking hold. It is a beautiful thing to watch a car like that move, even when the engine is silent. The long, sweeping hood, the wire wheels catching the flat gray light, the British racing green paint absorbing the world around it. It is a design of pure fluidity. It looks like speed frozen in metal. As the tires touched the asphalt of my driveway, Elena stepped forward. She was practically vibrating now, her anxiety manifesting as a manic helpfulness. "Thank you," she chirped, her voice too loud, too bright. She extended a manicured hand, palm up. "I'll take the keys. You can go now. We have it from here." She wanted him gone. She wanted the witness removed from the site before the accident occurred. She wanted the transaction closed so the demolition could begin. The driver did not hand her the keys. He didn't even acknowledge her outstretched hand. It was as if she were a ghost, a transparent entity with no mass or consequence. He unhooked the winch cable from the undercarriage, the heavy steel hook clanking against the pavement. He coiled the cable with slow, deliberate movements, wiping his hands on a rag that was black with grease. "Excuse me?" Elena said, her tone sharpening, the entitlement bleeding through the veneer of kindness. "I said I will take the keys." The driver walked past her. He moved with the heavy, unstoppable momentum of a glacier. He came to a stop directly in front of me. Up close, he smelled of stale tobacco, old coffee, and the metallic tang of iron filings. It was an honest smell. It was the smell of a construction site at dawn, before the architects arrive in their clean suits. He held the keys in a fist the size of a sledgehammer. I could see the Jaguar logo on the fob peeking out from between his thick, scarred fingers. "Harrison Blackwood?" he asked. His voice sounded like gravel churning in a cement mixer, rough, abrasive, and utterly devoid of pretense. "I am Harrison Blackwood," I said. He looked at me for a long moment. He was searching for something in my face. Perhaps he was looking for the frailty Elena had undoubtedly described to him. Perhaps he was looking for the senility that would make his next action easier. Or perhaps he was just looking for a reason to do the right thing. He turned his head slowly and looked at Elena. She was hovering behind him, her face a mask of confusion and rising panic. He looked back at me. Then he turned and walked 5 paces to his left. There is a storm drain grate set into the cobblestones near the garage door. It is a heavy iron grid designed to catch the runoff from the torrential rains that sometimes sweep through the canyon. It is deep.
It leads directly into the municipal sewer system, a dark, rushing river of waste that flows beneath the polished surface of our wealthy lives. The driver stood over the grate. He extended his arm. He opened his hand. Clink. The sound was small, but in the silence of the driveway it was deafening. The keys fell. They struck the iron bar of the grate once, a bright musical note, and then vanished into the darkness below.
Plop. A faint splash echoed up from the depths. For a second, the world stood still. The architecture of the moment froze. Then the facade cracked. "What the hell are you doing?" Elena shrieked. It was not a question. It was a primal scream of frustration. The composure she had maintained for weeks, the carefully constructed persona of the doting wife, shattered instantly. "Are you insane? Those are original keys. Do you know what those cost?" She lunged toward him, grabbing at his massive arm. "I'll have you fired. I'll sue your company. I'll have you arrested for destruction of property." The driver didn't flinch. He didn't pull away. He simply stood there, an immovable object, letting her beat her fists against the granite of his indifference. "Get inside, lady," he rumbled, not looking at her. "Harrison!" she screamed, turning to me, her eyes wide and wild, the whites showing all around the irises. "Did you see that? He's drunk. He's crazy. Call the police. We have to get the spare set. We can still go. We can still—"
She trailed off. She realized what she was saying. She was fighting too hard for a simple Sunday drive. She was fighting for the timeline of my death. I did not move. I did not look at the drain. I looked at the man. "Silence, Elena," I said. My voice was low, but it carried the weight of steel beams. She froze, her mouth open, her chest heaving. The command confused her. I was supposed to be the victim here, the confused old man relying on her guidance. The driver stepped forward again, moving into my personal space. He turned his back to Elena, effectively creating a wall of dirty blue cotton between my wife and me. He blocked her from view. He blocked her from hearing. He leaned in. He was close enough that I could see the pores on his nose, the gray stubble on his chin. He had grease under his fingernails, black crescents of accumulated labor. "I didn't service the brakes, Mr. Blackwood," he said softly. The world narrowed down to the two of us. The gray sky, the hysterical wife, the beautiful car, it all faded into the background. "I didn't change the oil either," he continued. I looked into his eyes. They were tired eyes. Eyes that had seen too many wrecked cars and too many broken bodies. "What did you do?" I asked. My face remained impassive, a mask of carved stone, though my heart was beginning to beat a heavy war drum rhythm against my ribs. He glanced over his shoulder at the Jaguar, then back to me. "I took the money she paid me to keep my mouth shut," he said, his voice a low rumble that only I could hear. "She handed me an envelope thick enough to choke a horse, said she wanted no paperwork, said she wanted no record of the service." He paused, licking his dry lips. "And then," he whispered, "I put the car up on the lift, and I looked at the steering column." A cold wind swept across the driveway, biting through my cardigan. It was the chill of confirmation. The blueprint was no longer theoretical. The structural defect had been identified. "Show me," I said. Elena's voice had become a serrated edge, sawing through the heavy afternoon air. She was clawing at the mechanic's massive arm, her manicured nails digging into the oil-stained fabric of his jumpsuit. It was a pathetic display, the desperate, flailing panic of a cornered animal that realizes the trap door has failed to open. "He's drunk! Harrison, get inside! Look at him, he smells like a distillery!" she shrieked, spitting the words. She turned to me, her face a contorted mask of feigned concern. "Harrison, please, call the police, he's dangerous!" She was vibrating, a frenetic frequency of fear. She reached for me, intending to herd me back into the house, to push the senile old man into the safety of his armchair where he could not see the truth. Enough. I lifted my cane, the hickory shaft with the silver wolf's head, and brought it down. Crack! The ferrule struck the wet pavement with the sound of a gunshot. The noise cut through her hysteria like a scalpel. "Silence, Elena." I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. I spoke with the tone I had used to silence boardrooms of squabbling executives in the 80s, the tone that had dismissed contractors and leveled negotiations.
It was a voice of absolute bedrock authority. It had been dormant for 3 years, buried under a performance of frailty, but the foundation remained intact. Elena froze. Her hand hovered in midair, inches from my chest. She blinked, her mouth slightly agape, the color draining from her cheeks until the rouge stood out like bruises. She had never heard this voice. She only knew the murmuring, agreeable invalid she thought she had married. For a second, the predator saw the glimmer of steel beneath the wool. I turned my back on her. I looked at the mountain of a man standing by the open driver's side door. "Show me," I said. The mechanic, Miller, nodded. He didn't look surprised by the sudden shift in my demeanor. Men who work with machines understand that engines often sound different under load than they do at idle. I moved toward the car. I did not shuffle. I did not drag my left leg. I walked with the measured, purposeful gait of a site inspector approaching a structural failure. When I reached the door, I did something I hadn't done in front of Elena in months. I bent my knees. The pain flared, sharp and hot. My joints are indeed worn, the cartilage thinned by time, but I pushed it into a mental box and locked the lid. I knelt on the cold, damp asphalt, ruining the knees of my trousers. I didn't care. The fabric was replaceable. The life she had tried to steal was not. "Here," Miller grunted. He produced a heavy mag light from a loop on his belt. He clicked it on, the beam cutting through the gloom of the wheel well and illuminating the darkness beneath the dashboard. He had removed the lower cowling, the plastic shroud that hides the ugly, necessary organs of the machine. I leaned in, squinting against the glare. "Look at the column," he said, tracing the beam along the steering shaft, right where it passes the firewall. I saw it. It was a piece of art in a grotesque industrial way. The steering column is a solid rod of hardened steel, designed to translate the rotation of the wheel into the lateral movement of the tires. It is built to withstand immense torsion. It is the spine of the car, and it had been severed. A ring of bright, fresh metal shone against the dull gray of the aged steel. It was a cut, precise and deep, filed down with a diamond-edged tool. It wasn't a break, it was a preparation. The rod had been sawed 3/4 of the way through, leaving only a thin, panicked strip of metal holding the assembly together. "Torque," Miller whispered, his voice low and reverent, as if describing a natural disaster. "The metal is fatigued. You take the car out, you drive straight, it holds, the tension is low." He moved the light, making the fresh wound glint like a diamond. "But the first hairpin in the canyon," he continued, "the first time you have to crank the wheel hard to the left to avoid the guardrail." Snap. I stared at the cut. I could see the physics of it. The sheer force applied by my own hands on the steering wheel would exceed the tensile strength of the remaining material. The connection would sever. The steering wheel would spin freely in my hands, useless as a child's toy. The wheels would remain locked in their forward trajectory. "No steering," Miller said, narrating my death. "Momentum takes you. You go straight over the edge at Dead Man's Curve. 300 feet down. The impact crumples the chassis. The fire burns the evidence. They find a wreck. They find a dead old man who lost control." I reached out and touched the cold metal with my fingertip. I felt the roughness of the file marks. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was architectural demolition. It was a controlled implosion designed to look like a collapse. "They don't look for file marks in a crushed chassis," he added, "especially not when the driver is 72 and has a documented history of dizziness." I pulled my hand back. My finger came away with a smudge of fresh metal dust, the dust of my own coffin. I remained kneeling for a moment longer. I was not looking at the car anymore. I was looking at the timeline of my marriage. I saw the cups of tea she had brought me with trembling hands. I saw the insistence on the drive. I saw the fake smile as she waved goodbye to a man she believed was already a ghost. She hadn't just planned to kill me. She had planned to erase me. She wanted the narrative to be tragic accident, leaving her the grieving widow, the sole beneficiary of the Blackwood estate, free to spend my legacy on pool boys and white wine. I stood up. My knees popped, a sound like a pistol hammer cocking. I brushed the grit from my trousers. I looked at Miller. He had clicked the flashlight off. He was watching me with a mixture of pity and respect. "She offered me 10,000, he said quietly.
I looked over his shoulder at Elena. She was standing by the porch, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the screen. She was paralyzed by indecision. Calling the police would bring scrutiny. Running would be an admission of guilt. She was trapped in the foyer of her own design. $10,000, I repeated. A pittance. The price of a life. Cash, Miller said, in an envelope. She said I didn't need to know why, just that the steering needed to fail. He patted the fender of the Jaguar, a gentle, heavy thump. But my dad worked on Jags, he said, his voice thickening slightly. He taught me to respect the Series 1, the lines, the engineering. It's a piece of history. He shook his head, looking at the sleek green curve of the hood. I couldn't do it to the car, he said. It seemed sinful. To wreck a machine this beautiful just to kill a man? I looked at him. A strange chill went through me, colder than the wind. He had not saved me because of the sanctity of human life. He had saved me because he could not bear to see the architecture of the Jaguar destroyed. I was merely the passenger. The car was the VIP. Not the car, I murmured, staring at the vehicle that had been my sanctuary and almost my tomb. What? Miller asked. You couldn't do it to the car, I said, correcting the preposition in my mind. The car was the victim. I was collateral damage. Yeah, guess that's right. I turned my gaze back to the house, back to the woman in the cashmere sweater who was watching us with eyes that held the terror of a structural failure. The blueprint was clear now. The inspection was complete. The defects were documented. It was time to pour the concrete. Miller, I said, my voice crisp and devoid of the tremor I had feigned for so long, you have done a great service. Do not leave. I reached into my pocket and retrieved my phone, not the jitterbug with the large buttons she insisted I use, the encrypted smartphone I kept hidden in the lining of my jacket. Pull your truck across the gate, I commanded. Block the exit. She does not leave this property until I have dismantled her. Miller grinned. It was a slow, jagged expression, revealing yellowed teeth. He understood demolition. Yes, sir, he said. I dialed. The phone rang once. Blackwood, I said into the receiver, initiate the protocol. I have the evidence. We are moving to the liquidation phase. I stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate, the joints of my knees popping like dry twigs snapping in a winter forest. I dusted the asphalt grit from my trousers with a rhythmic swish-swish of my hand. I did not look at the damage to the fabric. I looked at Elena. She was pale, the blood having drained from her face so completely that her foundation now sat atop her skin like a layer of cheap stucco on a rotting wall. Her eyes were wide, darting between me and the mechanic, calculating the structural integrity of her lie. She was searching for a crack she could slip through. He's lying, she whispered, the sound escaping her throat like a hiss of steam. She pointed a trembling finger at Miller. Harrison, look at him. He's filthy. He's trying to extort us. He damaged the car himself to get money. It's a scam. I read about this on the internet. She was improvising. It was a sloppy, frantic attempt at narrative control. She was trying to build a shelter out of straw in the middle of a hurricane. I allowed my shoulders to slump. I let my mouth hang slightly open, adopting the confused, bewildered expression of the man she believed me to be. I needed her to feel safe. I needed her to believe that the foundation of my trust in her was still intact, even as I prepared the dynamite. Extortion? I murmured, blinking rapidly. I don't understand. Why would he? Because he's a criminal, Harrison. She grabbed my arm again, her grip clammy. Please, let's just go inside. Let's call the police from the house. It's cold out here. You'll catch your death. You'll catch your death. The irony was almost delicious. I patted her hand, feeling the frantic pulse in her wrist. Yes, perhaps you are right. It is too much for me. I turned my gaze away from Miller, effectively dismissing his accusation in her eyes. Go inside, Elena, I said, my voice quavering just the right amount. Fix me a drink. A scotch. The Macallan. Neat. I need to handle this misunderstanding with the gentleman. I will pay him off if I must. I just want peace. She hesitated. I could see the gears grinding in her mind. To leave me alone with the witness was a risk, but to stay was to risk the police arriving while the mechanic was still shouting about murder. She decided that my senility was her best defense. She believed I would simply write a check to make the problem go away, as I had done with so many minor inconveniences in our marriage. "Okay," she breathed, the relief washing over her face. "Okay, just get rid of him, Harrison. Please." She turned and ran toward the house, her heels clicking rapidly on the pavers. She looked like a thief fleeing a jewelry store. I watched her go. I waited until her hand touched the brass handle of the front door. I waited until the heavy oak slab swung shut. I waited for the audible click of the latch. The moment that sound reached my ears, the posture of the invalid evaporated. I straightened my spine. I rolled my shoulders back, the phantom hunch disappearing. I took a deep breath of the cold, damp air, filling lungs that were far stronger than I let anyone know. The temperature of my demeanor dropped to absolute zero. I turned to the mechanic.
"Name?" I asked. My voice was no longer the rustle of dead leaves. It was the strike of a hammer on an anvil. The giant man blinked, taken aback by the sudden transformation. He straightened up, sensing the shift in authority. "Miller. Jack Miller." "Miller," I said, locking eyes with him. "You have done a great service today. You have saved a life, and you have saved a Jaguar. I value the latter almost as much as the former." He snorted, a brief, surprised laugh. "It's a good car, Mr. Blackwood." "It is," I agreed. "Do not leave. I want you to get back in your cab. Back the truck up until it is perpendicular to the gate. Block the exit. No one comes in, and more importantly, she does not go out." Miller's eyes narrowed. He looked at the house, then back to me. He understood. This wasn't just a dispute, it was a siege. "You got it," he rumbled. "And Miller?" "Yeah?" "If she tries to drive through you, do not move. She values her Range Rover too much to scratch the paint." He grinned, a dark, conspiratorial expression. "I'm a tow truck driver, Mr. Blackwood. I don't move for nobody." As he climbed into his cab, I pulled my phone from my inner pocket. I did not call 911. The police are a blunt instrument. They are the wrecking ball you use only when the building is already condemned. I needed precision. I needed surveyors and engineers. I dialed Stanton. Stanton is a man who charges $900 an hour and is worth every penny. He is not a moral man, but he is a precise one. He picked up on the second ring. "Harrison?" His voice was guarded. "I rarely call on Sundays." "Record this call, Stanton," I said. "I am activating the hostile asset protocol regarding Elena." There was a pause. The rustle of paper. "Go ahead." "There has been an attempt on my life. Tampering with the Jaguar. Steering column severed. Intent to cause fatal mechanical failure." "Jesus, Harrison. Are you safe?" "I am securing the perimeter now. I have a witness. I have the physical evidence. I need you to draft an affidavit immediately. I will send you the witness's details in a moment."
"Understood," Stanton said, his tone shifting instantly from friend to litigator. "I'll have a notary on standby." "Also," I continued, pacing slowly across the driveway, the cane now resting lightly in my hand like a baton, "pull the prenuptial agreement, Section 14, Paragraph B, the Infidelity and Malice Clause. I want you to review the subsection regarding constructive abandonment of life." "The Slayer rule triggers automatically if criminal charges are filed," Stanton noted. "I know the law, Stanton," I snapped. "I don't just want her disinherited, I want her bankrupt. I want the gross misconduct clause to trigger the retroactive clawback of all gifts and allowances given in the last 24 months. I want the jewelry. I want the car. I want the clothes on her back." "If we can prove malice," Stanton said slowly, "we can strip the paint off the walls. I am sending you the photos now. Draft the papers. I want them ready for digital signature within the hour." I hung up. I dialed my second number. Vance, a forensic investigator who used to work for the FBI's cybercrimes division before he realized private equity paid better. "Vance," I said, "I need a mirror of the local Wi-Fi router logs for the past 30 days. Specifically, look for search history related to steering column schematics, brake failure, or autopsy toxicology. And I need you to ping the GPS location of my wife's burner phone." "She has a burner?" Vance asked. "She thinks she's clever," I said. "She keeps it in the lining of her Pilates bag. Find it. Dump the text logs. I want every conversation she's had with anyone other than her hairdresser." "On it. Give me 20 minutes. I ended the call. The legal scaffolding was going up. Now I needed the mortar. I walked to the garage. Miller had already moved the truck, effectively sealing the estate. He walked back down the driveway, carrying his heavy toolbox. "Open the door, Miller," I said, gesturing to the garage bay where my tools were kept. "We are going to conduct an inspection." We pushed the Jaguar into the garage. It rolled silently, a wounded beast seeking a cave. I hit the switch for the overhead banks of LED lights. The space flooded with a clinical white brilliance. My garage is not a storage unit, it is a laboratory. The floor is epoxy-coated gray. The tool chests are red snap-on, organized by metric and imperial, by function and frequency of use. "Get the car up," I ordered. Miller used my hydraulic floor jack. He lifted the front end of the E-Type, setting it securely on jack stands. For the next 45 minutes, we worked in a silence that was broken only by the click of my camera shutter and the scratch of Miller's pen on paper. I used my DSLR with a macro lens. I photographed the steering column from every angle. Click, the overview showing the removed cowling. Click, the bright ring of fresh metal where the file had bitten into the steel. Click, the metal filings resting on the floor mat, which the idiot hadn't bothered to vacuum. Click, the serial number of the steering assembly, proving it was the original part. "Look here," Miller said, pointing with a scribe. "See the cross-hatching. He or she used a bastard file first to break the surface, then a finer grain to deepen the cut. It's methodical. This took time, 20 minutes of sawing at least." "Methodical," I repeated, snapping a photo of the tool marks. "Premeditated." I handed Miller a clipboard. "Write it down. Everything you told me, the condition of the car, the bribe, the exact words she used when she gave you the envelope. Do not embellish, just the facts. Facts are the bricks we build the prison with." Miller wrote. His handwriting was blocky and crude but legible. He wrote for 10 minutes, his tongue poking from the corner of his mouth in concentration. While he wrote, I moved to the workbench. I found a caliper. I measured the depth of the cut, 4.2 millimeters. The steering shaft was 6 millimeters in diameter. "She left 1.8 millimeters of steel," I whispered to myself, "just enough to back out of the driveway, just enough to get to the highway." It was an engineering marvel of malice. I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. It wasn't the heat of anger. It was the chill of absolute clarity. I had provided for this woman. I had given her a life of leisure, travel, and luxury. I had known she didn't love me. I am not delusional, but I had expected a certain level of transactional respect. I had expected her to wait for nature to take its course. But she was greedy. She wanted the payout now. She wanted to clear the site before the lease was up. "Done," Miller said, handing me the clipboard. I read it. It was perfect. Blunt, honest, damning. "Sign it," I said. "Date it, and put your driver's license number at the bottom." He did. I took the clipboard. I scanned the document with my phone and sent it to Stanton. Ping. A message from Vance. Router logs accessed. Search history confirms Jaguar E-Type steering diagram accessed 3 days ago. How to file steel silently accessed yesterday. Also, I found the burner. Texts to a number registered to a Dr. Eris Thorne. Subject, "Is it done yet? I can't stand the smell of him anymore." Dr. Thorne, her personal trainer. I almost laughed. The cliché was so tired it was insulting. I put the phone away. I looked at Miller. "We are done here," I said. "The foundation is set." "What now?" Miller asked, wiping his hands on a rag. I walked over to the wall and took down a bottle of solvent. I poured a little onto a clean cloth and wiped a smudge of grease from the Jaguar's fender. Even in the midst of a murder investigation, standards must be maintained. "Now," I said, checking my watch, "I go back inside. I drink her scotch, and I invite her for a drive." "You're going to get in the car with her?" Miller looked at me like I was insane. "No," I corrected him, turning to face the door that led into the house. "We are going to take her car, and she is going to drive. I want to see her face when we approach the cliff. I want to see the moment she realizes the structure is coming down on top of her head." I picked up my cane. I hunched my shoulders. I practiced the tremor in my hand until it was convincing. "Stay by the truck, Miller," I said. "Wait for the police. And if she tries to run, be the wall." "On the wall," he confirmed. I opened the door to the kitchen. The warmth of the house hit me, smelling of vanilla and treachery. Construction was over. It was time for the demolition.
The heavy fire door connecting the garage to the mudroom clicked shut behind me. I paused in the small transitionary space, listening to the silence. It was the silence of a house that had lost its soul, a structure where the inhabitants were merely squatters in a museum of accumulated wealth. I took a moment to reset my physical architecture. I allowed my spine to curve, rounding my shoulders forward. I unlocked the tension in my knees, permitting them to tremble slightly. I loosened my grip on the cane so that it would tap-tap-drag against the floor tiles, the rhythm of infirmity. I adjusted my facial expression, smoothing out the sharp lines of the architect and replacing them with the soft, bewildered slackness of the pensioner. It is a performance I have perfected over 3 years. It is method acting for the purpose of survival. I opened the inner door and stepped into the kitchen.
The room was a cavern of Calacatta marble and stainless steel, designed by a man in Milan who had clearly never cooked a meal in his life. It was cold, sterile, and blindingly white. Elena stood by the island, the only spot of color in the room, wearing a cashmere sweater the color of a bruise. She was pacing, 4 steps left, turn, 4 steps right, a pendulum of nervous energy. In her hand, she clutched a heavy crystal tumbler, one of my Waterford pieces. The amber liquid inside sloshed dangerously near the rim as she moved. I smelled it before I saw the bottle, the peat smoke, the sherry cask finish. She was drinking my Macallan 25. It was a small violation compared to the attempted murder, but it stung nonetheless. That bottle was reserved for victories and births. She was drinking it to steady her nerves after hiring a hitman. The vulgarity of it was breathtaking. "Is he gone?" she asked the moment she saw me. Her voice was brittle, cracking at the edges. She stopped pacing, her knuckles white around the glass. I shuffled forward, leaning heavily on the cane. I let my eyes wander around the room for a second before focusing on her, feigning a slight delay in processing. "He is," I said. I injected a note of weary resignation into my voice. "A difficult man. Very loud. What did he want?" She took a gulp of the scotch, wincing at the burn. She doesn't even like whiskey. She drinks it because it costs $400 a glass. "Money, of course," I lied. He claimed there was a billing error from the last service, said he was owed for labor on the differential. He was quite drunk, Elena, slurring his words. I watched the tension drain out of her body. It was a physical collapse. Her shoulders dropped, her grip on the glass loosened, and she exhaled a long, shuddering breath. It was the reaction of a woman who had been standing on the gallows trap door, only to hear the executioner call for a lunch break. "Oh, thank God," she whispered, leaning back against the marble counter for support. "I was so worried about you, Harrison. I thought he was going to... I don't know. He looked violent." "I paid him off," I continued, playing the role of the conflict-averse pacifist. "I wrote him a personal check for $500. He seemed satisfied. He drove away." "500?" She blinked, the accountant in her brain momentarily overriding the conspirator. "That's extortion, Harrison." "Peace of mind is worth more than $500, I said, shuffling closer. "I just wanted him off the property. I didn't want the police involved. You know how I hate the fuss. The sirens, they upset my arrhythmia." "Yes," she said, nodding eagerly. "Yes, exactly. You did the right thing. Best to just let it go." She finished the scotch in one long swallow and set the glass down on the counter with a loud clack. She smoothed her hair, recomposing the mask of the doting wife. "Well," she said, her voice brightening, returning to that cloying nursery school teacher tone she used with me. "That's over. Now, why don't you go rest in the study? I can bring you some tea. The excitement was probably too much for you." She was trying to reset the board. The plan to kill me via the Jaguar had been aborted due to the drunk mechanic. Now she needed to regroup, contact Dr. Thorne, and formulate a new strategy. She wanted me tucked away, sedated by Earl Grey and boredom, while she went to her room to text her lover. "Rest?" I asked, looking confused. "But the drive?" She froze. "The drive?" "The canyon," I said. "You said I needed air. You were so insistent, Elena, and you were right. I feel stifled in here." I gestured vaguely at the expansive, air-conditioned kitchen. The walls, they feel like they are closing in. But the car, she stammered. You said the Jaguar was running rough. Yes. Miller, that was his name, he was right about one thing. The engine sounded uneven. A misfire, perhaps. I don't trust it. Oh. The disappointment in her eyes was naked. It flickered across her face like a shadow. She had spent days psyching herself up for the phone call she would receive, the call from the highway patrol informing her that her husband's vintage car had gone through the guardrail at Dead Man's Curve. To have the weapon taken away at the last second was a cruel structural failure in her plans. Well, she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, maybe next week then, when we get the car looked at by a real mechanic, someone like Giovanni. She turned to pick up the empty glass, intending to put it in the dishwasher and wash away the evidence of her anxiety. No, I said. The word was soft, but it stopped her. No, she asked, turning back. I need the air today, I said. I tapped my chest lightly. Dr. Evans was very clear at my last checkup. Harrison, he said, you are rotting indoors. Fresh air is vital for your heart condition, circulation, oxygen. I cannot wait for next week, Elena. I feel faint. I allowed myself a slight sway, grabbing the edge of the island as if to steady myself. Harrison, she stepped forward, reflexively reaching out, then stopping. Are you okay? I just need to get out, I wheezed slightly. Let's take your car. She blinked. My car? The Range Rover, I said. It is comfortable. The suspension is soft. It won't rattle my bones like the Jaguar. She hesitated. The white Range Rover Autobiography was her sanctuary. It was her mobile command center. It was where she gossiped with her friends, where she likely met Dr. Thorne, where she felt powerful. She hated me being in it. She claimed I smelled like old paper and dust, and that I messed up her seat settings. I don't know, Harrison. It's low on gas, and we can stop, I said. Please, Elena, just a short drive, up to the lookout and back, for my heart. I played the guilt card. I laid it on the table face up. She couldn't refuse a dying man's request for fresh air without breaking character. If she denied me this, the facade of the loving wife would crack. She was trapped by her own narrative. Okay, she sighed, the calculation visible in her eyes. She probably figured a drive would at least get me out of the house, perhaps give her a chance to text Thorne while I stared at the ocean. Okay, fine. Let me get my purse. I'll drive. Yes, I said, offering a rare, thin smile that felt like stretching dried parchment. You drive. I wanted her to drive. Usually when we went out, which was rare, I hired a driver, or she drove while I sat in the back like a piece of luggage. But today, I needed her hands on the wheel. I needed her foot on the brake. I needed her to feel the weight of the vehicle. I want to look at the view, I added, softening my voice, and I want to look at you. We haven't had a drive, just the two of us, in so long. No chauffeurs, no nurses, just us. She flinched. The sentiment was too close to intimacy for her comfort. It repulsed her. I could see it. The idea of me staring at her, examining her while she navigated the twisting roads of the canyon, it made her skin crawl. But she had no exit. That sounds lovely, Harrison, she lied. Let's go. She walked past me to the mudroom to retrieve her keys. As she passed, I caught a whiff of her perfume again. Jasmine and rot. I waited a beat, then followed. As we stepped out into the gray afternoon, the air was indeed crisp. It bit at the exposed skin of my face. The driveway was empty. The flatbed truck was gone, or rather, moved. I knew Miller had parked it perpendicular to the main gates, blocking the only exit from the estate, hidden from view by the curve of the driveway and the rhododendron hedges. We were in a sealed environment. Elena walked to her Range Rover. It was a behemoth of a vehicle, glistening white with rims that cost more than my first house. She unlocked it with a beep that sounded like a cheerful bird. Shotgun, I murmured, a word I hadn't used in 40 years. What? She looked at me, confused. I will sit in the front, I said, beside you. Oh, of course. I opened the passenger door. The interior smelled of vanilla air freshener and leather conditioner. It was spotless. There was not a single crumb, not a single receipt. It was a showroom of a life. I climbed in, groaning for effect as I lifted my leg.
I settled into the white leather seat. It was soft, enveloping. I placed my cane between my knees, the silver wolf's head resting against my chin. Elena climbed into the driver's seat. She pushed the start button. The engine purred to life, a refined, computerized hum, a stark contrast to the raw, mechanical growl of the Jaguar. She adjusted the mirror. She checked her lipstick in the reflection. She looked at her phone one last time, sliding it into the center console cup holder. "Ready?" she asked, not looking at me. "Ready," I said. She put the car in gear. We rolled down the driveway. As we approached the gate, the first obstacle of my demolition plan came into view. The heavy iron gates were open, as is standard during the day, but beyond them, blocking the private road that led down to the coast highway, was the flatbed truck.
Miller had positioned it perfectly. It was an insurmountable wall of steel and rubber. "What on earth?" Elena slowed the car, frowning. "Why is he still here? You said he left." "He must have broken down," I improvised. "Or perhaps he is securing the chains. Just drive around him, Elena. Take the upper service road." "The service road?" She looked at me, incredulous. "Harrison, that road is gravel. It's steep. I just had this car washed." The service road was indeed gravel. It was a fire access road that wound up the back of the hill, bypassing the main gate and connecting directly to the high canyon ridge. It was narrow, winding, and had no guardrails. It led directly to the precipice. "Please," I said, clutching my chest lightly. "I don't want to wait for him to move. I feel tight. The elevation will help. The air is thinner up there."
She looked at the truck blocking her exit. She looked at the service road winding up the hill into the fog. She looked at me. She was annoyed. She was impatient. She wanted this over with. "Fine," she snapped, "but if I get a rock chip, you're paying for it." "I pay for everything, my dear," I said softly. She spun the wheel. The tires crunched onto the gravel. We began the ascent. The trap was not just set. The door was welded shut. We were climbing toward the sky, and I was the only one who knew we were actually descending into hell.
The climb was a study of contrasts. Outside, the world was raw and hostile, a landscape of scrub oak, loose shale, and a gray mist that clung to the canyon walls like wet wool. Inside the Range Rover, the environment was sterile, temperature-controlled to a precise 70 degrees, and scented with the chemical perfection of new car and Elena's cloying jasmine. The gravel crunched beneath the massive 22-inch tires, a muffled crump, crump, crump that sounded distant, like artillery fire heard from a bunker. The air suspension absorbed the ruts of the fire road with arrogant ease, transforming the rugged terrain into a gentle undulation. We were floating up the mountain, detached from the earth, insulated from the consequences of gravity. Elena drove with white-knuckled precision. Her hands were at 10 and 2, her posture rigid. She was not a natural driver. She treated vehicles as appliances, expecting them to obey her without understanding the physics involved. On this narrow, winding track, her lack of feel was evident. She braked too late into the turns and accelerated too early coming out, causing the heavy SUV to lurch. But her tension was not just about the road. I watched her from the corner of my eye, my head resting against the headrest, feigning fatigue. She kept glancing at the side mirrors. She kept looking at the guardrails, or rather the lack of them on this service road. She was ghost driving. In her mind, she was not in the white Range Rover. She was imagining the Jaguar E-Type. She was simulating the drive I was supposed to be taking. She was visualizing the green hood entering the corner. She was imagining the steering wheel spinning uselessly in my hands. She was picturing the slide, the tire smoke, the sickening crunch of metal against rock, and the silence that would follow. She was mourning the murder that hadn't happened. "It's steep," she muttered, breaking the silence. Her voice was tight. "I hate this road. Why is the main gate blocked? That truck driver is incompetent." "Construction," I murmured, my eyes half closed. "Always construction. The world is under constant repair, Elena." We rounded a switchback. The ocean came into view below us, a vast, flat sheet of lead merging with the sky. We were high now. The air was thinner. To our left, the canyon wall rose vertically. To our right, the drop was severe, a 400-foot tumble into a ravine choked with sharp boulders and dry brush. The silence returned, heavier than before. It was a pressurized silence, expanding against the windows. "You know," I said softly, staring out at the abyss, "I built this family like a skyscraper." Elena flinched. The sound of my voice seemed to startle her. She glanced at me, then back to the treacherous road. "What?" she asked, distracted. "A skyscraper," I repeated. I shifted in my seat, turning slightly to face her profile. When I designed the monolithic towers in Chicago or the spire in Dubai, the principle was always the same. You dig deep. You drive piles down to the bedrock. You pour a foundation that can withstand 10 times the calculated load. She let out a short, nervous laugh. "Harrison, you're being poetic. It's unlike you. You're usually so literal." "Engineering is poetry, Elena," I said. "It is the poetry of forces, tension, compression, shear."
I watched her hands tighten on the leather wheel. The knuckles were bleached white. "I thought I had done that with us," I continued, my voice dreamy, the voice of an old man rambling. "I thought I had built a steel frame, indestructible, capable of weathering any storm." "We are, Harrison," she said quickly, the lie automatic. "We are strong. You're feeling vulnerable because of your health. It's natural. But do you know what brings a skyscraper down, Elena?" We were approaching the summit of the ridge. This was the intersection where the service road met the old scenic loop, the exact stretch of asphalt known colloquially as Dead Man's Curve. It was a hairpin turn with a decreasing radius, banking hard to the left away from a sheer cliff face. It was the kill zone. Elena slowed the car. She knew this turn. She had likely driven it a dozen times in the last week, scouting the location, calculating the angles. Seeing it now, with me sitting alive beside her, must have been disorienting.
"What?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "What brings it down?" "It isn't the wind," I said, my voice hardening slightly, losing the tremor. "The wind makes the building sway, but the steel flexes, it handles the stress." She guided the rover around the bend. The tires hummed on the pavement now as we briefly joined the tarmac. The drop-off was right there, inches from her window. "It isn't the earthquake," I went on. "The dampers absorb the shock. The building moves, but it stands." I looked at the guardrail. It was old wood and rusted cable. It would not stop a 3,000-pound Jaguar hitting it at 40 miles per hour. It would snap like thread. "It's the rust," I said. The word hung in the air, cold and sharp. Elena braked hard, bringing the car to a crawl in the middle of the turnout. She turned to look at me, her eyes searching my face. "The rust?" "The corrosion," I clarified, meeting her gaze with a look of lucid, terrifying clarity. "The oxidation that starts on the inside, hidden behind the drywall, hidden behind the paint, the rot you can't see." I reached out and tapped the dashboard, right above the glove box. "It eats away at the bolts," I said. "It weakens the connections. Silence, secrets, greed. They are the chemical agents of corrosion. The building looks perfect on the outside. The facade is shining glass. But inside, the beams are turning to dust." She stared at me. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. The fog swirled around the car, isolating us in a gray void. "And then," I whispered, leaning closer to her, "one day you apply a little pressure. You take a turn a little too fast. You try to steer." I mimicked the motion of turning a steering wheel with my hands, then let my hands drop limply to my lap, and the bolts shear off. The color drained from her face completely. She looked at my hands. She looked at my eyes. She saw something there that didn't belong to the frail husband she thought she controlled. She saw the architect. "Harrison," she stammered, her voice trembling. You're scaring me. Why are you talking like this?" "I am just thinking about structure," I said, leaning back and closing my eyes again, masking the predator, "and how easily things break when they are not built on truth." I pointed a finger toward the gravel pull-out ahead, the one perched on the very edge of the cliff. "Pull over here," I said. "Here?" She looked at the turnout. It was narrow. The drop was precipitous. "It's a blind turn, Harrison. It's dangerous. Pull over." The command cracked like a whip. It was not a request. It was an order from the site foreman. She flinched, her reflex to obey overriding her fear. She swerved the massive vehicle into the gravel turnout, the tires crunching loudly.
She put the transmission in park, but she kept her foot on the brake, as if ready to flee. The engine hummed, the fog pressed against the glass. We were perched on the edge of the world. "What is wrong with you?" she demanded, her fear turning into defensive anger. "You're acting strange. Is it your meds? Do I need to call Dr. Evans?" I turned to her. I didn't yell, I didn't strike her. I simply reached into the breast pocket of my cardigan. I pulled out a folded document, the affidavit Stanton had emailed me, which I had printed in the study while she was changing her shoes. I placed it on the dashboard between us. The paper was crisp and white against the dark leather.
"Miller didn't just drop the keys, Elena," I said, my voice dropping to a register of absolute freezing calm. She stared at the paper. She recognized the header, Affidavit of Witness. "He dropped a recording," I lied, "a digital recording of your conversation from last Tuesday, the one where you handed him an envelope of cash." I watched the realization hit her. It wasn't a wave, it was a landslide. "The one where you told him," I quoted, looking directly into her dilated pupils, "make sure it looks like an accident. I can't wait for the cancer to take him." The silence that followed was total. The air in the car seemed to vanish, sucked out by the vacuum of her terror. "Harrison," she whispered, the name choking her. "The police are currently at our home," I continued, checking my watch with casual indifference. "They are seizing your laptop. They are cloning your phone. And there is a patrol car coming around that bend in roughly 30 seconds. She looked at the rearview mirror, panic seizing her features. She looked at the gear shift. "Don't," I said softly. "The rust has already done its work, Elena. The building is coming down." "Pull over." The command did not come from the throat of a 72-year-old invalid. It came from the diaphragm, resonant and unyielding, the kind of voice that stops heavy machinery on a job site. Elena's hands jerked on the wheel. The Range Rover swerved violently to the right, the tires biting into the loose gravel of the turnout. We slid toward the edge, the anti-lock brakes grinding, kurr, 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 before the vehicle shuddered to a halt. We were perched on the lip of the abyss. Through the windshield, beyond the hood of the car, there was nothing but gray mist and the suggestion of a 300-foot drop. The ocean crashed silently against the rocks far below, a graveyard waiting for a visitor. Elena slammed the gear shift into park. She turned to me, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a mixture of adrenaline and fury. "What is wrong with you?" she shrieked, the sound sharp and jagged in the enclosed cabin. "You could have killed us. This is a blind turn, Harrison. Are you demented?" I looked at her. I did not blink. I did not tremble. I slowly uncurled my fingers from the handle of my cane and placed my hands on my knees. They were steady as stone. "I am not demented, Elena," I said. "I am arguably the most lucid person in this vehicle." The sudden shift in my cadence, the removal of the slurry softness, the return of my crisp transatlantic diction struck her like a physical blow. She recoiled against the door, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. "Harrison?" she whispered. I reached into the breast pocket of my cardigan. I withdrew the folded affidavit. It was a single sheet of paper, heavy bond, cream-colored. I unfolded it with deliberate slowness, smoothing the crease with my thumb. I placed it gently on the leather dashboard between us. "Miller didn't just drop the keys," I said, my voice low and conversational, as if discussing the weather. "He dropped a recording." A recording?" Her skin turned the color of ash. "Digital audio," I lied. The lie was the structural support for the truth I was about to pour. "High fidelity. It captured your conversation from last Tuesday perfectly, the rustle of the envelope, the counting of the bills." I turned my head and locked eyes with her. "And specifically," I continued, "the instruction you gave him. I believe the exact phrasing was, 'Make sure it looks like an accident. I can't wait for the cancer to take him.'" The silence that followed was total. It was the silence of a collapsing building in the split second between the detonation and the fall. "No," she breathed. "No, that's illegal. He can't record me. That's inadmissible." "We are not in a courtroom yet, Elena," I said. "We are in a car that you bought with my money, sitting on a cliff where you intended for me to die." I checked my watch. A Patek Philippe, precise to the second. The police are currently at our home, I said. They are executing a warrant based on Miller's sworn testimony and the physical evidence of the severed steering column. They are seizing your laptop. They are cloning your phone. Vance is already downloading your text history with Dr. Thorne. Her eyes bulged. How do you know about Eris? I know everything, I said. I know about the burner phone in your Pilates bag. I know about the treatments that happened when you claimed to be at the spa. I know that you refer to me as the corpse in your messages. I leaned forward, invading her personal space. The scent of her fear, acrid, metallic, overpowered her perfume. And I know that a patrol unit from the sheriff's department turned onto the canyon road 3 minutes ago. They will be coming around that bend in approximately 30 seconds. She broke. It was an ugly, frantic disintegration. She lunged across the center console, grabbing my hand with clammy, desperate fingers. Her nails dug into my skin, but I felt nothing but revulsion. "Harrison, please," she sobbed, the tears flowing instantly, ruining her mascara. "You don't understand. I was confused. I was off my medication. You know I get manic. I didn't mean it. It was just talk. We can fix this." She squeezed my hand, trying to transmit an affection that had never existed. "I love you," she wailed. "I've taken care of you for 3 years. Doesn't that count for anything? I wiped your chin. I helped you walk. We're a team." I looked at her hand on mine. It looked like a parasite attaching itself to a host. "Remove your hand," I said. "Harrison, baby, please, remove your hand." She snatched her hand back as if I were made of burning coals. I brushed the spot where she had touched me, wiping away the contamination. "You cannot renovate a condemned building, Elena," I said coldly. "When the foundation is rotten, you do not patch the cracks, you demolish the structure." I pointed to the affidavit on the dashboard. "The attempt on my life triggers the Slayer rule in the probate code," I explained, my voice taking on the lecture hall quality of a professor. "By attempting to hasten my death to inherit, you are legally treated as if you predeceased me. You get nothing. Not the house, not the trust, not a single cent of the insurance policy you were so eager to cash." She shook her head, sobbing. "I don't care about the money. I just want you." "Liar," I said. "You are a fiduciary failure. And speaking of contracts," I held up a finger. "The attempt validates the gross misconduct and infidelity with malice clauses in our prenuptial agreement. Section 14, paragraph B. I had Stanton review it this morning. It allows for a retroactive clawback." "Clawback?" she choked out. "I am revoking every gift, allowance, and asset transfer from the last 24 months, I said. "The jewelry, the wardrobe, the furs." I looked around the interior of the car. "And this vehicle," I added. "You used a joint account to pay the lease. That is technically embezzlement of estate funds given the intent to murder. I will be repossessing the Range Rover." "You're leaving me with nothing?" she screamed, her face twisted into a mask of hatred. "I gave you the best years of my life." "You corrected, and you are leaving with exactly what you brought to this marriage, your debt and your audacity." She stared at me, her chest heaving. The realization was setting in. The lifestyle, the social standing, the future she had plotted. It was all gone, vaporized. "I'll fight you," she hissed, the predator trying to surface one last time. "I'll tell them you're senile. I'll tell them you abused me. I'll get the best lawyers." "With what money?" I asked softly. The question hung in the air. She froze. "Dr. Thorne?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I looked into his financials, Elena. He is a personal trainer with a leased BMW and $30,000 in credit card debt. I doubt he has the liquidity to fund a criminal defense against the Blackwood estate." Her jaw dropped. She looked out the window. She looked at the drop. For a second, I saw her calculate the distance. I saw her wonder if driving us both over the edge would be better than the humiliation that awaited her. I tapped my cane on the floorboard. Crack. Don't even think about it, I said, reading her mind. The car has automatic emergency braking, and frankly, you lack the conviction. Then we saw the lights, blue and red, flashing against the gray mist of the canyon. The cruiser swept around the curve, silent and predatory. It slowed as the officer spotted the white Range Rover parked in the turnout. Elena stopped breathing. She slumped against the window, her body going limp. The fight had left her. The facade had collapsed. All that was left was the rubble. "The demolition is complete," I whispered. I reached over and unlocked the doors. "Try to maintain some dignity, Elena," I said, adjusting my cuffs, "for the neighbor's sake." The blue and red lights did not flash, they pulsed. They washed over the white leather interior of the Range Rover in a rhythmic strobe, a silent alarm signaling the end of the performance. I watched the reflection of the lights in Elena's eyes. She had stopped screaming. Now she was merely leaking. Tears, snot, drool, the undignified fluids of a human being whose entire reality has been decompressed. She slumped against the door, a marionette whose strings had been severed. A knuckle rapped against the driver's side window. Tap, tap, tap. It was a polite sound, but it carried the weight of the state. I unlocked the doors. The mechanism clicked. The sound of a cell locking, or unlocking, depending on which side of the law you stood. The door opened. The cold air of the canyon rushed in, displacing the scent of jasmine and stale fear. A uniformed officer stood there, his breath pluming in the mist. I recognized him immediately. Sergeant Reynolds. A good man. I had sponsored his daughter's softball team for 3 years running. "Mrs. Blackwood," Reynolds said, his tone professional but firm, "please step out of the vehicle." Elena didn't move. She couldn't. She was catatonic. "Step out, ma'am," Reynolds repeated, reaching in to unbuckle her seatbelt. I opened my own door and stepped out into the gravel turnout. The wind was biting, carrying the salt spray from the ocean 300 feet below. I leaned on my cane, straightening my spine. I took a deep breath. The air tasted clean. It tasted like truth. I walked around the front of the car, my cane crunching softly on the stones. Reynolds looked up and saw me. His expression softened from authority to deference. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "my apologies for the scene. Are you injured?" "I am quite well, Sergeant," I said, my voice steady, "though I cannot say the same for my wife's composure." Reynolds nodded. He gestured to his partner, a younger officer who was currently assisting a sobbing Elena out of the driver's seat. They didn't rough her up. They didn't need to. She was fluid, boneless. They handcuffed her wrists behind her back. The click of the steel ratchets was sharp and final. "We have the statement from the mechanic, Mr. Miller," Reynolds said quietly, stepping closer to me so Elena wouldn't hear. "The MDA is already involved. Attempted murder, solicitation, tampering with a vehicle. It's a heavy list, sir." "It is a necessary inventory," I replied. "She was thorough in her planning. It is only right that the law be thorough in its response." I looked at Elena. She was standing by the patrol car, her cashmere sweater snagged, her hair a bird's nest. She looked at me. Her eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a terrifying mixture of hatred and pleading. She looked like a child who had broken a vase and couldn't understand why she wasn't being forgiven. "Harrison?" she croaked. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I looked at her with the clinical detachment of a building inspector condemning a structure that was no longer safe for habitation. "Officer," I said to Reynolds, keeping my eyes on her, "be gentle with her. She breaks easily." The irony was lost on her, but Reynolds gave a grim smirk. "We'll follow protocol, sir." They guided her into the back of the cruiser. She had to duck her head to enter the cage. The door slammed shut. She pressed her face against the glass, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear and didn't want to. "Please. Sorry. Help." I looked through her. I focused on the horizon line where the gray ocean met the gray sky. I focused on the structural integrity of the guardrail. I focused on the silence. A rumble approached from down the road, the flatbed truck. Miller pulled the behemoth into the turnout, the air brakes hissing. He didn't look at the police. He looked at the white Range Rover. He looked at me. He rolled down his window. "Tow it?" he asked. "Impound it," I corrected. "It is evidence." "And Miller?" "Yeah? Be careful with the transmission. It's German. I plan to sell it at auction once the asset forfeiture is complete." Miller nodded, a single somber dip of his chin.
It was the salute of one craftsman to another. He understood that we weren't just moving a car, we were clearing the debris from the site. "You need a ride, Mr. Blackwood?" Reynolds asked. "No, thank you, Sergeant. I have called a taxi. I wish to return to my home alone. I have some cleaning up to do."
The taxi ride back down the canyon was uneventful. I sat in the back of a Prius that smelled of pine tree air freshener, watching the landscape roll by. The fog was lifting. The structure of the coastline was revealing itself, jagged, hard, enduring. I arrived at the estate. The gates were open. The driveway was empty. The police cruisers were gone, having finished their raid. I paid the driver and tipped him $50. "For the silence," I said. He didn't ask what I meant. I stood in the driveway for a moment. The house loomed above me. To many, it would look like a mausoleum, cold stone, dark windows, too big for one man. But to me, it looked like order. It looked like geometry. The lines were straight, the foundation was solid, the rot had been excised. I walked into the garage. The lights were still on, casting a laboratory glare over the epoxy floor. In the center of the bay, up on the jackstands, sat my Jaguar E-Type. It looked wounded. The front cowling was still removed, exposing the engine. The steering column was still severed, the file mark a silver scar on the dark steel. I walked over to it. I ran my hand along the fender. The metal was cool and smooth. "We are a pair, you and I whispered to the machine. We were both vintage. We were both high maintenance. We had both been underestimated, and we had both been sabotaged by someone who didn't understand the value of what they were trying to destroy. But the chassis was straight. The engine was sound. The steering could be replaced. A new column, a few hours of labor, and she would run again. She would run better. "I will order the parts from England tomorrow," I promised. I turned off the garage lights, plunging the room into darkness, leaving the car to rest. I entered the house. The silence hit me first. It wasn't the empty, anxious silence that had filled these halls for the last 3 years, the silence of secrets being kept, of whispers behind closed doors. This was a heavy, dense silence, the silence of a library, the silence of a vault. It was the silence of ownership. I walked into the kitchen. The glass she had used was still on the counter. A lipstick stain, a garish shade of red, rimmed the crystal. I picked it up. I walked to the sink. I didn't wash it. I dropped it. Crash. The crystal shattered against the stainless steel basin. Shards of glass glittered under the faucet. I turned on the disposal. The machine roared, grinding the glass into dust, washing it away into the dark pipes below. I walked to the study, my sanctuary. The walls were lined with mahogany and books. The blueprints of my life's work hung in frames, skyscrapers, bridges, museums, structures built to last. I went to the wet bar. I took down the bottle of Macallan 25. I took a fresh glass, a heavy, unblemished tumbler. I poured 2 fingers. No ice. Ice dilutes the truth. I sat in my leather wingback chair. The leather groaned as I settled into it, a familiar, welcoming sound. I rested my cane against the desk. I took a sip. The scotch was smoky, rich, with notes of dried fruit and oak. It warmed my chest. It tasted like victory. Not the cheering, confetti-filled victory of a game, but the quiet, grim victory of a war won by attrition. I looked around the room. There were no flowers. There was no cloying perfume. There was no white noise of reality television from the other room. There was no predator waiting for me to sleep. I was alone. The world would call this a tragedy. They would say, "Poor Mr. Blackwood, all alone in that big house." They would pity the widower. Let them. They build their lives on drywall and hope. I build mine on steel and contracts. I swirled the amber liquid in the glass, watching the vortex form and collapse. The fire was out. The heat was gone. The structure had been tested by the flames, and the weak timber had burned away. All that was left was the ash. I closed my eyes and listened to the house settle around me. The beams contracted in the cooling air. The foundation shifted microscopically in the earth. It was a symphony of stability. "The rat is gone," I whispered into the dark. "The house is mine." I took another sip, and for the first time in years, I tasted peace.